Imagine hearing about a shooting at a government facility and realizing almost no one is talking about it. That's exactly what happened in Texas at an ICE detention center, and the details surrounding this case are raising more questions than answers. A gunman opened fire, leaving one detainee dead and two others wounded before turning the weapon on himself. At first glance, officials claimed the shooter left behind ammunition with anti-ICE messages written on them, suggesting a political motive. But here's where things don't quite add up. Despite those messages, the only people who were shot were detainees, not ICE agents or law enforcement officers. That fact alone has many observers skeptical, because if the attack was truly meant to target ICE, why were the victims the very people in custody and not the officers working there? The FBI, currently leading the investigation, has been hesitant to release clear details, saying only that the evidence pointed to anti-ICE messaging. When pressed about the identities of the victims, they refused at first to clarify whether they were detainees or law enforcement, even though later reports confirmed all those shot were detainees. This silence and selective sharing of information has fueled suspicion that something deeper is at play. Almost immediately, politicians began seizing on the incident to push their narrative. Senator Ted Cruz and others wasted no time blaming Democrats, claiming that their critical rhetoric against ICE somehow inspired the violence, despite having no evidence. Vice President and other leaders echoed the same framing, suggesting this was a politically motivated left-wing attack. But critics quickly pointed out that these claims didn't line up with the facts. No law enforcement officers were harmed, only detainees were caught in the gunfire. That didn't stop officials from trying to spin the shooting and to another example of violence against law enforcement, even though the evidence points elsewhere. Community fact-checkers later corrected these statements, showing that public officials were pushing misleading claims. Adding to the confusion, ICE's acting director described the event as a direct attack on law enforcement, a statement flatly contradicted by the official reports. That contradiction only raises more questions about why authorities are framing the event this way. Skeptics argue that the anti-ICE writing found on ammunition looks suspiciously staged, pointing out that it's unusual to find such clear handwriting on bullets, especially when the actual victims were detainees rather than ICE officers. Commentators like journalist Aaron Rupar noted the odd mismatch. If the shooter really wanted to target ICE, how did every victim end up being a detainee instead? Was the shooter a poor marksman, or was the entire situation being misrepresented to the public? Meanwhile, some Republican figures have used this case to ramp up fear about so-called left-wing extremism, saying the country faces a wave of politically motivated attacks. They insist this incident is part of a pattern, despite the lack of confirmed evidence linking it to an organized ideology. Their warnings fuel division, suggesting that political opponents are dangerous threats rather than fellow citizens. Many worry this rhetoric is setting the stage for even greater violence, as it signals to unstable individuals that they should take action in the name of politics. Instead of waiting for facts, leaders on the right quickly jump to conclusions that fit their narrative. In reality, what we know so far paints a very different picture. 3 detainees shot, no officers injured, and vague, questionable evidence being used to tell a story of political extremism. Whether the shooter was mentally unstable, politically motivated, or manipulated into creating a spectacle, the truth remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is how fast misinformation can spread when leaders exploit a tragedy for political gain. This shooting has become less about the victims themselves and more about how politicians and officials choose to frame the story, often ignoring inconvenient facts. And while investigators continue their work, the public is left wondering what really happened inside that Texas ICE facility and why the official story doesn't quite line up with reality.